On his 18th birthday, a young man was kicked out of his home with nothing but a key to a worthless chicken coop. But what he discovered inside wouldn't just give him a future. It would rewrite his entire past. If you've ever felt lost or been told you're not worth anything, I think this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in second chances, because we're all about that here. The key felt like a shard of ice in my palm. It was old, iron, and rusted in the grooves. It was the only thing my stepmother, Carol, handed me that wasn't sealed in a manila envelope. The envelope contained a deed, a single folded piece of paper that transferred ownership of a quarter-acre of forgotten land 2 hours north of the city. The key, she said with a thin, satisfied smile, was for the only structure still standing on it. "Your father wanted you to have it," she'd said, her voice smooth and sharp, like glass grinding on stone. "A fine inheritance. A chicken coop." She didn't have to add the word worthless. It hung in the air between us, thick and suffocating. It was in the curl of her lip, the dismissive flick of her wrist as she turned back toward the polished oak door of the house I'd grown up in. The house my father had bought. The door clicked shut, the deadbolt slid home with a heavy, final thud. And just like that, my life was cleaved in two. There was the before, a hazy, grief-stricken landscape of the 2 years since Dad died. And then there was the now, me, standing on a manicured lawn with a duffel bag at my feet, a useless key in my hand, and the echoing finality of that closing door. I didn't move for a long time. The sprinklers came on, hissing to life on their timer, and I had to step back onto the pavement to avoid the spray. It felt like the house itself was trying to wash me away, to erase the scuff marks of my existence from its perfect green canvas. My whole life was in that duffel bag. A few changes of clothes, a worn copy of a book Dad and I used to read, my phone, and a framed picture of the 3 of us from before Mom got sick, before the world tilted on its axis and never quite righted itself, before Carol. I looked at the house, a place that had once been synonymous with safety, with the smell of my dad's coffee in the morning and the sound of his laughter. Now it was just a building full of memories that didn't belong to me anymore. Carol had systematically erased him, and by extension, me. His favorite armchair was replaced. His workshop in the garage was cleared out and turned into a sterile space for her car. My height chart, marked in pencil on a door frame since I was 5, was painted over in a tasteful, sterile beige. It was a slow, methodical erasure, and this was the final stroke. My bus ticket was a one-way fare. I'd used the last of the cash I had from my part-time job. The bus station was a gray, soulless place, smelling of disinfectant and despair. I sat on a hard plastic chair, my duffel bag clutched between my knees, and watched the people coming and going. Families greeting each other with hugs, couples holding hands, people with destinations and purpose. I was just going. To a chicken coop. A bitter laugh almost escaped my lips. It was a joke, a final, cruel joke from a woman who had seen me as nothing more than a burden, a leftover piece of her husband's previous life that she was legally obligated to tolerate until my 18th birthday. The law said she had to provide for me until I was an adult. She had followed the letter of that law, and not an inch more. At 12:01 a.m. on the morning of my birthday, she had woken me up, the envelope and key already in her hand. There was no cake, no card, just the quiet, triumphant finality in her eyes. The bus groaned to life, and I found a seat by a window smeared with the greasy fingerprints of a dozen previous journeys. As we pulled out of the city, the landscape began to change. The tight grid of streets and concrete towers gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to strip malls, and finally to the open rolling fields of the countryside. The sky seemed to get bigger out here, the clouds more defined. It was the kind of sky Dad had loved. He was a city guy by necessity, an engineer who worked in a downtown office. But his heart was always somewhere wilder. He'd talk about buying a piece of land one day, a place where you could see the stars without the city glow, a place where the only sound was the wind in the trees. I guess he'd done it. And this was what was left of that dream, a dilapidated shed on a forgotten plot of land. I wondered if he knew. If he knew this was what his grand dream would become, what his legacy to his only son would be. The thought soured in my stomach. Maybe Carol was right. Maybe it was all worthless. Maybe he'd been a fool, and I was the fool's son, heading toward a future made of rotting wood and dirt floors. The further the bus traveled, the more my anger began to curdle into a kind of hollow sadness. I wasn't just angry at Carol. I was angry at my dad. Angry that he'd left me. Angry that he'd married her in the first place, a year after Mom died, in a whirlwind of what he'd called a new start, and what I'd seen as a betrayal. I was angry that he hadn't been stronger, that he hadn't seen through her. And I was angry that he hadn't prepared me for this. He'd always been the planner, the one with flowcharts and backup systems for everything. How could he have left me in a position where this was even possible? The grief was a physical thing, a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window and watched the trees blur past. Each one a fleeting shape of green and brown, gone before I could truly see it. It felt like my life, a series of moments and people, blurred and gone. The bus driver called out my stop, Blackwood Creek Road, and the name sounded as desolate as I felt. I was the only one who got off. The bus pulled away with a hydraulic hiss, leaving me in a cloud of diesel fumes and a profound, unnerving silence. I was standing on the shoulder of a two-lane county road. On one side was a dense wall of forest. On the other, a rusty mailbox with the numbers half faded, and behind it, a gravel driveway choked with weeds. This was it. I took a deep breath. The air was different here. It smelled of damp earth, pine needles, and something else. Something clean and wild. It was the kind of air Dad had talked about. I hoisted my duffel bag onto my shoulder and started walking up the driveway. The gravel crunched under my worn sneakers. Weeds scraped at my jeans. The driveway curved, and then I saw it. It wasn't much. The property was a mess. A small, clapboard house stood in the center of the clearing, its porch sagging like a tired old man. The windows were boarded up, and the paint was peeling in long, curling strips. It looked abandoned, haunted by neglect, and to the side, set back near the tree line, was the chicken coop. It was larger than I'd expected, more like a small barn or a large workshop than a place for chickens. It was built of dark, weathered wood, with a steeply pitched metal roof that was streaked with rust. It looked old, but unlike the house, it seemed solid. The foundation wasn't crumbling. The roof line was straight. It had an air of quiet dignity that the main house lacked. My inheritance. I walked past the derelict house, my eyes fixed on the coop. The grass was knee-high and damp with dew. Crickets chirped in the overgrown bushes. A crow cawed from a high branch, a lonely, mocking sound. The door to the coop was a heavy planked affair with a large, rusted padlock. The key Carol had given me. It slid into the lock with a grating sound. For a moment, I thought it wouldn't turn. It was stiff with age and disuse. I put both hands on it, channeling all my frustration, my grief, my fear, into that one small motion. With a loud, protesting groan, the mechanism turned. The lock sprang open. I pulled it free, its weight surprising in my hand. The door was heavy. I had to lean my shoulder into it, and it swung inward with a deep, sonorous creak, the sound of a place that hadn't been opened in a very, very long time. The air that rushed out was cool and dry. It smelled of sawdust, old oil, and cedar. Not chickens. Definitely not chickens. I stepped inside, letting my eyes adjust to the gloom. Sunlight streamed in through a grimy window on the far wall, illuminating swirling motes of dust. The space was cavernous. It was a workshop. A long, heavy workbench ran the length of one wall, covered in a thick blanket of dust. Tools hung from pegs on the wall above it: saws, chisels, planes, hammers. They were old, many of them with hand-carved wooden handles, but they looked well cared for, preserved under the grime. In the center of the room was a massive, dust-shrouded shape. I walked over and pulled off the heavy canvas tarp covering it. It was a lathe, a serious, industrial-looking piece of equipment. Along the other wall were stacks of wood, neatly arranged by size and type. I could make out the dark grain of walnut, the pale gleam of maple, the reddish hue of cherry. This wasn't a chicken coop. This was a craftsman's sanctuary. This was my father's secret world. I ran my hand along the workbench, leaving a clean streak in the thick dust. Underneath, the wood was smooth and oiled, scarred with the nicks and cuts of countless projects. This was where he'd gone. On those weekends he'd said he was going fishing with friends or attending a conference. This is where he was. He was here, making things, creating. I felt a strange mix of emotions: awe, confusion, and a fresh wave of that anger. Why did he hide this? Why didn't he ever tell me? Was he ashamed of it? Or was he hiding it from someone? The answer came to me in a cold rush. Carol. He had bought this place, built this workshop, before he even met her. This was his, and he had kept it that way. A place she couldn't touch, couldn't paint over, couldn't replace. A small, secret act of rebellion. I started to explore more methodically, my heart pounding with a strange sense of purpose. This wasn't a worthless inheritance. It was a mystery. I checked the drawers of the workbench. They were filled with more tools, drill bits, sandpaper, and jars of screws and nails. In the back of one drawer, tucked beneath a pile of old rags, I found a small, leather-bound journal. His handwriting. I recognized it instantly, the neat, slightly slanted block letters of an engineer. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't a diary. It was a project log. Dates, sketches, notes on wood types, joinery techniques. The last entry was from the week before he died. He was working on a guitar. The sketch was detailed, beautiful. He had never told me he knew how to make guitars. He had never told me any of this. I spent the next hour just touching things, trying to connect with the ghost of the man who had occupied this space. I picked up a hand plane. The wooden handle was worn smooth, shaped to the curve of his palm. I could almost feel the warmth of his hand, the pressure as he guided it over a piece of wood. The feeling of connection was so intense it was painful. He was here. His energy, his passion, his secrets, They were all soaked into the very walls of this place. I sat down on a dusty stool, the journal in my lap, feeling more lost and alone than ever. What was I supposed to do with all this? A collection of old tools and a half-finished guitar. It was beautiful, it was meaningful, but it wouldn't keep me from starving. It wouldn't put a roof over my head, not a habitable one anyway. Carol's words echoed in my head. A fine inheritance. Maybe the joke was still on me. The value here was purely sentimental, and sentiment doesn't pay the bills. I was about to give in to the despair, to just curl up on the dusty floor and cry, when my foot knocked against something under the workbench. A loose floorboard. It wasn't obvious. The whole floor was made of wide, rough-hewn planks, and this one looked just like the rest, but it had shifted slightly when I kicked it. My curiosity piqued. I knelt down. I tried to pry it up with my fingers, but it was snug. I looked around, and my eyes landed on a crowbar leaning against the wall. Perfect. I wedged the tip into the thin crack and leaned back. The wood groaned, and with a final splintering pop, the board came loose. I tossed it aside and peered into the darkness below. There was a hollow space beneath the floor, and in that space, nestled on the cool, dark earth, was a metal box. It was an old military-style ammo can, painted olive drab, with a heavy latch on the front. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was the heart of the secret. With trembling hands, I lifted the box out. It was heavy, much heavier than an empty can should be. I set it on the workbench, wiping the dirt and cobwebs from the lid. There was no lock. I took a deep, shaky breath, as if I were about to dive into deep water, and I flipped the latch. It opened with a loud, metallic clank. I lifted the lid. Inside, the first thing I saw was a thick, sealed envelope with my name, Leo, written on it in my father's hand. Beneath it were stacks of cash, bundled in paper bands from a bank. Not a fortune, but more money than I had ever seen in my life. 10s, 20s, 50s. And beneath the money, there was something else. A smaller velvet pouch, a few more official-looking documents, and another, smaller key. I pushed the money aside, my hands going straight for the letter. This was what I needed. Not the money, but the answers. I sank back onto the stool, the heavy envelope in my hands, and I began to read. "My dearest Leo," it began. The words blurred for a moment through a sudden film of tears. I blinked them away, forcing myself to focus. "If you are reading this, then the worst has happened, and I am gone. I am so sorry. I'm sorry I'm not there to guide you. I'm sorry for the mess I've likely left behind. And I'm sorry for all the secrets." I had to pause, taking a ragged breath. The apology, so direct, so full of a pain I could feel lifting off the page, cracked open something inside me. "I need you to listen, son, and I need you to try to understand. This place, this workshop, this was my sanity. After your mother passed, I was adrift. You were my anchor, Leo, never doubt that. But I needed something else, a place where I could build things, where I could feel like myself again. And then I met Carol." The next part of the letter was hard to read. He didn't write with hatred, but with a profound, weary sadness. I was lonely, and she was present. I thought I was doing the right thing, giving you a complete family again. I was wrong. I saw my mistake quickly, but by then it was complicated. I saw the way she looked at our home, at my finances, not as a partner, but as a proprietor. I saw the way she looked at you, as an obstacle, an expense. I knew then that I had to protect you. I couldn't divorce her without a fight that would have torn you apart and likely left me with nothing to give you. So I made a plan, a backup system, just like we always talked about. I smiled through my tears at that. A backup system, of course. This land, the letter continued, I bought it with a small inheritance from your grandmother, your mom's mom. I made sure it was in my name alone, and I put it in a trust for you, to be transferred on your 18th birthday, untouchable by anyone else. Carol knows it exists, but I let her believe it was a failed investment, a worthless plot of land I was stuck with. I let her believe this workshop was just an old shed, a chicken coop. It was easier that way, safer. The money in this box should be enough to get you started. Pay for food, get the power turned on in the main house, buy a cheap car. It's not a fortune, but it's a runway. Use it wisely. I looked at the stacks of cash. A runway. That's exactly what it felt like. A chance to take off instead of just crashing. But the money isn't the real inheritance, Leo. The workshop is. The tools, the skills I hope I can pass on to you even now. In this box, you'll find the deed to this property, free and clear. You'll also find a card with the name of a lawyer, Mr. Henderson. He helped me set everything up. He knows the whole story. Call him. He'll help you with the legal side of things, with getting the utilities in your name. He's a good man. Trust him. I rummaged in the box and found the documents, and a business card for Robert Henderson, attorney at law. The last thing is in the velvet pouch. It's your mother's, and now it's yours. It might be the most valuable thing in here, but not in the way you think. I picked up the small, heavy pouch. My fingers fumbled with the drawstring. Inside was not a piece of jewelry, but a collection of old, rare seeds in small, labeled packets, and a small, folded piece of paper. It was a note from my mom to my dad, her beautiful, looping cursive, so familiar it hurt. Mark, it said, for our garden, for the future. Love, Sarah. My mother had been a passionate gardener, an expert in heirloom plants. It was her legacy, a different kind of inheritance, one of life and growth. My dad had saved it, protected it, and passed it on to me. I put the note down, my chest aching. This whole time, I had felt like an afterthought, a loose end my dad had left untended. But I wasn't. I was the mission. Every secret trip, every lie by omission, every hour spent in this dusty workshop had been for me. He was building me a lifeboat, piece by piece, right under Carol's nose. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been protecting me in the only way he knew how. The anger I'd felt toward him dissolved, replaced by a wave of gratitude and love so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. I cried then, not quiet, sad tears, but deep, racking sobs. I cried for my dad, for the years he'd spent living a double life to keep me safe. I cried for my mom, whose love was still growing in a dusty old box. And I cried for myself, for the lonely, scared kid on the bus who hadn't known that he wasn't heading toward a dead end, but a beginning. It's an incredible thing, isn't it? How a story can change just by learning one new piece of information. How someone you thought abandoned you was actually holding you the whole time. If you've made it this far, maybe it's because you know what that feels like. Maybe you've had a moment where the whole world shifted, and everything you thought was true turned out to be a lie. Or even better, a half-truth designed to protect you. If this is hitting you, I want you to know you're not alone. This community, right here, is for people who get it. Let me know in the comments if you've ever discovered a secret that changed everything. I read every one. Now, let's get back to what happened next, because finding the box wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of the fight. After the tears subsided, a new feeling began to take root: determination. It was a cold, hard resolve that settled deep in my bones. I looked around the workshop, no longer seeing dust and decay, but potential. I saw the legacy my father had left me, not of money, but of craft, of self-reliance, of love. He had given me the tools, literally and figuratively. It was up to me to use them. I spent the rest of the day in a daze of activity. I found a push mower in a corner of the workshop, and after some tinkering, I managed to get the old engine to sputter to life. I mowed a path from the coop to the driveway, then another to the sagging porch of the house. The simple act of clearing the weeds, of imposing a small amount of order on the chaos, felt monumental. It was the first mark I'd made on my own life. That night, I slept in the workshop. I found an old cot folded up in a corner, and I used the dusty canvas tarp from the lathe as a blanket. It was cold, and the unfamiliar sounds of the countryside, the chirping of insects, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustling of some small creature in the woods, kept me on edge. But for the first time in 2 years, I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's house. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I was in my own space. The floor beneath me was mine. The roof over my head was mine. It was a feeling of ownership so profound it was almost dizzying. The next morning, I used some of the cash to walk into the nearest small town and buy a cheap burner phone and a month of service. My first call was to the number on the business card. "Henderson Law," a crisp voice answered. I asked for Robert Henderson, my voice cracking slightly. I explained who I was, that I was Mark's son. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then the man's voice softened. "Leo, I've been waiting for your call. Your father was a great man, and a very careful one. Can you come to my office?" I agreed, and he gave me the address in a slightly larger town about 30 minutes away by bus. Meeting Mr. Henderson was like stepping into another world. His office was quiet and smelled of old books and lemon polish. He was an older man with kind eyes and a firm handshake. He sat me down, offered me a coffee, and then he laid it all out for me. My dad had indeed set up an ironclad trust. The property was mine, and there was nothing Carol could do about it. He had also set up a small investment account that he'd been contributing to for years, an account that Carol had no knowledge of. It wasn't life-changing money, but combined with the cash in the box, it was more than enough. It was a safety net, a real one. Mr. Henderson explained that my dad's biggest fear was that Carol would either sell the house from under me the moment I turned 18, or find a way to contest his will and leave me with nothing. "He wanted you to have a place that was yours," Mr. Henderson said, looking at me over his glasses. "A place to stand, so no one could ever push you over again." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. A place to stand. That's what this was. Over the next few weeks, a routine began to form. With Mr. Henderson's help, I got the power and water turned on in the main house. The place was a wreck inside, water stains on the ceiling, a floor that sagged in the kitchen, but it was structurally sound. It was a project, my project. I spent my days cleaning, tearing out ruined drywall, and making endless lists of repairs. I spent my evenings in the workshop. I started by cleaning and organizing. I carefully cleaned every tool, sharpening the blades of the planes and chisels, oiling the moving parts. I felt like I was getting to know my father in a new way, through the tools he'd chosen, the way he'd organized his space. I found more of his project journals, and I read them every night, studying his sketches, his notes. I started small, trying to replicate some of the simple joinery he'd sketched. My first attempts were clumsy, the cuts uneven. But I kept at it. I could feel him there with me, a patient teacher whose lessons were written in wood and steel. About a month after I'd arrived, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me. "Is this Leo?" a slick, overly friendly voice asked. I said it was. "My name is Jeff, from Sterling Development. We're buying up some parcels out in your area, and our records show you've recently taken ownership of the old Blackwood Creek property. Look, I'll be honest, the place is a teardown, but the land has some potential. We can offer you $20,000, cash. Quick close. You'll be free and clear of the burden." Burden. The word was a slap in the face. This place wasn't a burden, it was a gift. It was a sanctuary. It was home. "No, thank you," I said, my voice steady. "The property is not for sale." There was a pause. "Son, let's be real," Jeff said, his friendly tone gone. "It's a quarter-acre of weeds with a rotten house and a shed. 20 grand is more than generous. I happen to know your stepmother has already agreed to sell us the adjacent lot she inherited. We're trying to assemble a package for a new subdivision. You're holding things up." So that was it. Carol. She hadn't just kicked me out. She was trying to cash in on the land around me, boxing me in, assuming I'd be desperate enough to take the first lowball offer that came along. She probably got a kickback from the developer for delivering my piece of the puzzle. The thought made my blood run cold. She had underestimated my father, and now she was underestimating me. "I said," I repeated, my voice hard as ironwood, "it's not for sale. Not for 20,000, not for 100,000. Do not call me again." I hung up the phone, my hand shaking with adrenaline. The fight was here. It wasn't a hypothetical future problem anymore. It was a developer on the phone, and my stepmother's greed breathing down my neck. But I wasn't scared. I was angry, and that anger was fuel. I walked out of the house and stood in the yard, looking at the workshop. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. In that moment, I made a choice. I wasn't just going to stay, I was going to build. I was going to take the legacy my father had hidden for me and make it visible. I was going to turn this forgotten piece of land into something that honored him, something that proved Carol and her developer friends wrong. I wasn't just the boy who inherited a chicken coop. I was the son of a craftsman, and this was my workshop, my home. The decision settled over me with a sense of peace that was as solid and real as the ground beneath my feet. I had my place to stand, and I wasn't going to be moved. The months that followed were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. The work was slow and grueling. I started on the house, learning as I went. I watched countless hours of videos on plumbing, electrical work, and roofing. I made mistakes. I had to redo an entire section of drywall because I'd measured wrong. I nearly flooded the bathroom trying to install a new sink. But with every mistake, I learned. With every small victory, a light fixture that worked, a window that no longer leaked, my confidence grew. The locals in the nearby town started to recognize me. At first, they were wary, another city kid who'd probably give up and leave after the first winter. But they saw me at the lumber yard, at the hardware store, week after week, covered in sawdust and paint. They saw the progress on the house. The boarded-up windows came down, replaced with new glass. The sagging porch was jacked up, leveled, and rebuilt with fresh lumber. An old farmer named Sal, who owned the property down the road, stopped by one day. He was a man of few words, with hands like gnarled oak roots. He watched me struggle to fix the engine on my mower for a few minutes, then just grunted, walked over, and pointed to a clogged fuel line I'd missed. "Your dad was a good man," he said, surprising me. Quiet, kept to himself. But he helped me fix my tractor once. Didn't ask for a dime. He looked at the workshop. He made things, good things. From that day on, Sal would stop by every now and then, sometimes with a basket of vegetables from his wife's garden, sometimes just to offer a bit of gruff advice. It was the beginning of a community, a quiet, unspoken network of support I never knew I needed. My real solace, though, was the workshop. I finished the guitar my dad had started. I had to learn how, poring over his notes, carefully following the lines he'd drawn. The first time I strung it and strummed a chord, the sound that filled the workshop was so rich and clear it brought tears to my eyes. It felt like a conversation with him, a collaboration across time. I started taking on small projects for people in town, fixing a wobbly chair for the librarian, building a set of bookshelves for Sal's wife. The work was steady and my reputation grew. I wasn't getting rich, but I was paying my bills. I was self-sufficient. I was building a life, not just a house. One afternoon, a sleek black car I didn't recognize pulled up my driveway. Carol stepped out. I hadn't seen her since the day she'd kicked me out. She looked smaller, somehow, less imposing without the grand house as her backdrop. She looked around, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and undisguised greed. She saw the repaired house, the neat yard, the smoke curling from the workshop chimney where a small wood stove now kept me warm. "Leo," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "You've done a lot with the place." I didn't say anything. I just stood on my new porch, my arms crossed, and waited. "The offer from the developer is still on the table," she said, getting to the point. "In fact, they've increased it, significantly. They want this whole area. If we sell together, we could both walk away with a lot of money." I looked at her, at this woman who had tried to erase my father and discard me like trash, and I felt nothing but a distant pity. She saw land and saw dollar signs. I saw a legacy. She saw a burden, and I saw a beginning. "This place is my home, Carol," I said, and the words felt truer than anything I had ever said. "It's not for sale." She stared at me, her mask of civility cracking. For a second, I saw the raw, bitter anger she'd hidden for so long. She saw that she had lost, not just the land, but the power she'd had over me. She had thought my inheritance was a joke, a worthless chicken coop. But my father, in his quiet, careful way, had known its true value. It wasn't in the land, or the tools, or even the money. It was in the chance to build a life on my own terms, It was the gift of self-worth. She got back in her car without another word and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust that settled back onto the gravel of my driveway. My driveway. It's been a few years since that day. The house is finished, a comfortable, cozy home filled with furniture I built myself. The workshop is thriving. I have a small business now, crafting custom furniture and instruments. People come from all over the state to buy things made in the Coop, a name I've kept as a reminder of where I started, and a private joke between me and my dad. Sometimes, on clear nights, I sit on the porch and look up at the stars, the same stars my father wanted to see. I think about the circuitous, painful path that brought me here. I think about how an inheritance isn't always something you can deposit in a bank. Sometimes it's a key to a locked door. Sometimes it's a set of tools and the space to learn how to use them. Sometimes the most valuable thing a parent can leave their child is a place to stand. What my stepmother saw as worthless was, in fact, priceless. She kicked me out, hoping I would fail, but she only pushed me toward the one place where I could truly succeed. She thought she was giving me an ending, but she handed me a beginning. And for that, in a strange, ironic way, I'll always be grateful. This journey taught me that home isn't just a building. It's the place where you build yourself. It's the place where your past and your future meet, and you get to choose which boards to keep and which ones to replace. What I found inside that chicken coop wasn't just a secret workshop or a box of money. It was my father's final gift. It was his unwavering belief in me, hidden away until I was ready to find it. It was the proof that I was never abandoned, never forgotten. It was the story of a father's love, a love strong enough to reach across death and build a future for his son. And that's a story worth more than all the subdivisions in the world. So, what's the lesson here? For me, it was that the things people dismiss as worthless often hold the most value. It's about looking past the peeling paint and the rusty locks to see the potential underneath. It's about understanding that your real inheritance is the strength and resilience you build inside yourself. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever found strength in a place you were told was a dead end? I want you to share your story in the comments below. This channel is a community for survivors, for builders, for anyone who has ever had to start over with nothing but a key to a place that others called worthless. Your story matters. Let's build this community together. Thank you for listening, and please don't forget to subscribe. There are more stories to tell.